Easter Eve, a short story by Anton Chekhov. I was standing on the bank of the river Goltva, waiting for the ferry boat from the other side. At ordinary times, the Goltva is a humble stream of moderate size, silent and pensive, gently glimmering from behind thick reeds. But now, a regular lake lay stretched out before me. The waters of spring, running riot, had overflowed both banks and flooded both sides of the river for a long distance, submerging vegetable gardens, hayfields and marshes, so that it was no unusual thing to meet poplars and bushes sticking out above the surface of the water and looking in the darkness like grim, solitary crags. The weather seemed to me magnificent. It was dark, yet I could see the trees, the water, and the people. The world was lighted by the stars, which were scattered thickly all over the sky. I don't remember ever seeing so many stars. Literally, one could not have put a finger in between them. There were some as big as a goose's egg, others tiny as hemp seed. They had come out for the festival procession, every one of them, little and big, washed, renewed and joyful, and every one of them was softly twinkling its beams. The sky was reflected in the water. The stars were bathing in its dark depths and trembling with the quivering eddies. The air was warm and still. Here and there, far away on the further bank in the impenetrable darkness, several bright red lights were gleaming. A couple of paces from me, I saw the dark silhouette of a peasant in a high hat, with a thick, knotted stick in his hand. "How long the ferry boat is in coming?" I said. "It is time it was here," the silhouette answered. "You are waiting for the ferry boat too?" "No, I am not," yawned the peasant. "I am waiting for the illumination. I should have gone, but to tell you the truth, I haven't the 5 kopecks for the ferry." "I'll give you the 5 kopecks." "No, I humbly thank you. With that 5 kopecks, put up a candle for me over there in the monastery. That will be more interesting, and I will stand here. What can it mean? No ferry boat, as though it had sunk in the water." The peasant went up to the water's edge, took the rope in his hands and shouted, "Hieronym! Hieronym!" As though in answer to his shout, the slow peal of a great bell floated across from the further bank. The note was deep and low, as from the thickest string of a double bass. It seemed as though the darkness itself had hoarsely uttered it. At once there was the sound of a cannon shot. It rolled away in the darkness and ended somewhere in the far distance behind me. The peasant took off his hat and crossed himself. "Christ is risen," he said. Before the vibrations of the first peal of the bell had time to die away in the air, a second sounded, after it at once a third, and the darkness was filled with an unbroken quivering clamour. Near the red lights, fresh lights flashed, and all began moving together and twinkling restlessly. "Hieronym!" we heard a hollow, prolonged shout. "They are shouting from the other bank," said the peasant. "So there is no ferry there either. Our Hieronym has gone to sleep." The lights and the velvety chimes of the bell drew one towards them. I was already beginning to lose patience and grow anxious, but behold, at last, staring into the dark distance, I saw the outline of something very much like a gibbet. It was the long-expected ferry. It moved towards us with such deliberation that if it had not been that its lines grew gradually more definite, one might have supposed that it was standing still or moving to the other bank. "Make haste! Hieronym!" shouted my peasant. "The gentleman's tired of waiting." The ferry crawled to the bank, gave a lurch, and stopped with a creak. A tall man in a monk's cassock and a conical cap stood on it, holding the rope. "Why have you been so long?" I asked, jumping upon the ferry. "Forgive me, for Christ's sake," Hieronym answered gently. "Is there no one else?" "No one." Hieronym took hold of the rope in both hands, bent himself to the figure of a mark of interrogation, and gasped. The ferryboat creaked and gave a lurch. The outline of the peasant in the high hat began slowly retreating from me, so the ferry was moving off. Hieronym soon drew himself up and began working with one hand only. We were silent, gazing towards the bank to which we were floating. There, the illumination for which the peasant was waiting had begun. At the water's edge, barrels of tar were flaring like huge campfires. Their reflections, crimson as the rising moon, crept to meet us in long, broad streaks. The burning barrels lighted up their own smoke, and the long shadows of men flitting about the fire, but further too. One side and behind them, from where the velvety chime floated, there was still the same unbroken black gloom. All at once, cleaving the darkness, a rocket zigzagged in a golden ribbon up the sky. It described an arc, and as though broken to pieces against the sky, was scattered, crackling into sparks. There was a roar from the bank like a far-away hurrah. "How beautiful," I said. "Beautiful beyond words," sighed Hieronym. "Such a night, sir. Another time one would pay no attention to the fireworks, but today one rejoices in every vanity. Where do you come from?" I told him where I came from. "To be sure, a joyful day today." Hieronym went on in a weak, sighing tenor like the voice of a convalescent. "The sky is rejoicing, and the earth, and what is under the earth. All the creatures are keeping holiday. Only tell me, kind sir, why, even in the time of great rejoicing, a man cannot forget his sorrows." I fancied that this unexpected question was to draw me into one of those endless religious conversations which bored and idle monks are so fond of. I was not disposed to talk much, and so I only asked, "What sorrows have you, father?" "As a rule, only the same as all men, kind sir. But today a special sorrow has happened in the monastery. At Mass, during the reading of the Bible, the monk and deacon Nicolay died." "Well, it's God's will," I said, falling into the monastic tone. "We must all die. To my mind, you ought to rejoice indeed. They say if anyone dies at Easter, he goes straight to the kingdom of heaven." "That's true." We sank into silence. The figure of the peasant in the high hat melted into the lines of the bank. The tar barrels were flaring up more and more. "The Holy Scripture points clearly to the vanity of sorrow, and so does reflection," said Hieronym, breaking the silence. "But why does the heart grieve and refuse to listen to reason? Why does one want to weep bitterly?" Hieronym shrugged his shoulders, turned to me and said quickly, "If I died, or anyone else, it would not be worth notice, perhaps. But you see, Nicolay is dead. No one else but Nicolay. Indeed, it's hard to believe that he is no more. I stand here on my ferry boat, and every minute I keep fancying that he will lift up his voice from the bank. He always used to come to the bank and call to me that I might not be afraid on the ferry. He used to get up from his bed at night on purpose for that. He was a kind soul. My God, how kindly and gracious! Many a mother is not so good to her child as Nicolay was to me. Lord, save his soul." Hieronym took hold of the rope, but turned to me again at once. "And such a lofty intelligence, your honour," he said in a vibrating voice. "Such a sweet and harmonious tongue, just as they will sing immediately at early matins. Oh, lovely! Oh, sweet is thy voice." Besides all other human qualities, he had too an extraordinary gift. "What gift?" I asked. The monk scrutinized me, and as though he had convinced himself that he could trust me with a secret, he laughed good-humouredly. "He had a gift for writing hymns of praise," he said. "It was a marvel, sir. You couldn't call it anything else. You would be amazed if I tell you about it. Our father archimandrite comes from Moscow. The father sub-prior studied at the Kazan Academy. We have wise monks and elders, but would you believe it, no one could write them. While Nicolay, a simple monk, a deacon, had not studied anywhere, and had not even any outer appearance of it. But he wrote them. A marvel, a real marvel." Hieronym clasped his hands, and completely forgetting the rope, went on eagerly. "The father sub-prior has great difficulty in composing sermons. When he wrote the history of the monastery, he worried all the brotherhood and drove a dozen times to town, while Nicolay wrote canticles, hymns of praise. That's a very different thing from a sermon or a history." "Is it difficult to write them?" I asked. There's great difficulty. Hieronym wagged his head. You can do nothing by wisdom and holiness if God has not given you the gift. The monks who don't understand argue that you only need to know the life of the saint for whom you're writing the hymn and to make it harmonize with the other hymns of praise. But that's a mistake, sir. Of course, anyone who writes canticles must know the life of the saint to perfection, to the least trivial detail. To be sure, one must make them harmonize with the other canticles and know where to begin and what to write about. To give you an instance, the first response begins everywhere with the chosen or the elect. The first line must always begin with the angel. In the Canticle of Praise to Jesus the Most Sweet, if you are interested in the subject, it begins like this: of angels creator and Lord of all powers. In the Canticle to the Holy Mother of God, of angels the foremost sent down from on high, to Nicolay, the wonder-worker, an angel in semblance, though in substance a man, and so on. Everywhere you begin with the angel. Of course, it would be impossible without making them harmonize, but the lives of the saints and conformity with the others is not what matters. What matters is the beauty and sweetness of it. Everything must be harmonious, brief, and complete. There must be in every line softness, graciousness, and tenderness. Not one word should be harsh or rough or unsuitable. It must be written so that the worshipper may rejoice at heart and weep while his mind is stirred and he is thrown into a tremor. In the canticle to the Holy Mother are the words, "Rejoice, O thou too high for human thought to reach. Rejoice, O thou too deep for angels' eyes to fathom." In another place in the same canticle, "Rejoice, O tree that bearest the fair fruit of light, that is the food of the faithful. Rejoice, O tree of gracious spreading shade, under which there is shelter for multitudes." Hieronym hid his face in his hands, as though frightened at something or overcome with shame, and shook his head. "Tree that bearest the fair fruit of light, tree of gracious spreading shade," he muttered. To think that a man should find words like those. Such a power is a gift from God. For brevity, he packs many thoughts into one phrase, and how smooth and complete it all is. Light radiating torch to all that be, comes in the canticle to Jesus the Most Sweet. Light radiating. There is no such word in conversation or in books, but you see he invented it. He found it in his mind. Apart from the smoothness and grandeur of language, sir, every line must be beautified in every way. There must be flowers and lightning and wind and sun and all the objects of the visible world. And every exclamation ought to be put so as to be smooth and easy for the ear. "Rejoice, thou flower of heavenly growth," comes in the hymn to Nicolay, the wonder-worker. It's not simply heavenly flower, but flower of heavenly growth. It's smoother so and sweet to the ear. That was just as Nicolay wrote it, exactly like that. I can't tell you how he used to write. "Well, in that case, it is a pity he is dead," I said. "But let us get on, father, or we shall be late." Hieronym started and ran to the rope. They were beginning to peal all the bells. Probably the procession was already going on near the monastery, for all the dark space behind the tar barrels was now dotted with moving lights. "Did Nicolay print his hymns?" I asked Hieronym. "How could he print them?" He sighed. "And indeed, it would be strange to print them. What would be the object? No one in the monastery takes any interest in them. They don't like them. They knew Nicolay wrote them, but they let it pass unnoticed. No one esteems new writings nowadays, sir." "Were they prejudiced against him?" "Yes, indeed. If Nicolay had been an elder, perhaps the brethren would have been interested, but he wasn't 40, you know. There were some who laughed and even thought his writing a sin." "What did he write them for?" "Chiefly for his own comfort. Of all the brotherhood, I was the only one who read his hymns. I used to go to him in secret, that no one else might know of it, and he was glad that I took an interest in them. He would embrace me, stroke my head, speak to me in caressing words as to a little child. He would shut his cell, make me sit down beside him, and begin to read. Hieronym left the rope and came up to me. "We were dear friends in a way," he whispered, looking at me with shining eyes. Where he went, I would go. If I were not there, he would miss me, and he cared more for me than for anyone, and all because I used to weep over his hymns. It makes me sad to remember. Now I feel just like an orphan or a widow. You know, in our monastery, they are all good people, kind and pious, but there is no one with softness and refinement. They are just like peasants. They all speak loudly and tramp heavily when they walk. They are noisy, they clear their throats, but Nicolay always talked softly, caressingly, and if he noticed that anyone was asleep or praying, he would slip by like a fly or a gnat. His face was tender, compassionate. Hieronym heaved a deep sigh and took hold of the rope again. We were by now approaching the bank. We floated straight out of the darkness and stillness of the river into an enchanted realm, full of stifling smoke, crackling lights, and uproar. By now, one could distinctly see people moving near the tar barrels. The flickering of the lights gave a strange, almost fantastic expression to their figures and red faces. From time to time, one caught among the heads and faces a glimpse of a horse's head motionless, as though cast in copper. "They'll begin singing the Easter hymn directly," said Hieronym, "and Nicolay is gone. There is no one to appreciate it. There was nothing written dearer to him than that hymn. He used to take in every word. You'll be there, sir, so notice what is sung. It takes your breath away." "Won't you be in church, then?" "I can't. I have to work the ferry." "But won't they relieve you?" "I don't know. I ought to have been relieved at 8, but as you see, they don't come, and I must own I should have liked to be in the church." "Are you a monk?" "Yes, that is, I am a lay brother." The ferry ran into the bank and stopped. I thrust a 5-kopeck piece into Hieronym's hand for taking me across and jumped on land. Immediately, a cart with a boy and a sleeping woman in it drove creaking onto the ferry. Hieronym, with a faint glow from the lights on his figure, pressed on the rope, bent down to it, and started the ferry back. I took a few steps through mud, but a little farther walked on a soft, freshly trodden path. This path led to the dark monastery gates that looked like a cavern through a cloud of smoke, through a disorderly crowd of people, unharnessed horses, carts and chaises. All this crowd was rattling, snorting, laughing, and the crimson light and wavering shadows from the smoke flickered over it all. A perfect chaos. And in this hubbub, the people yet found room to load a little cannon and to sell cakes. There was no less commotion on the other side of the wall in the monastery precincts, but there was more regard for decorum and order. Here there was a smell of juniper and incense. They talked loudly, but there was no sound of laughter or snorting. Near the tombstones and crosses, people pressed close to one another with Easter cakes and bundles in their arms. Apparently, many had come from a long distance for their cakes to be blessed, and now were exhausted. Young lay brothers, making a metallic sound with their boots, ran busily along the iron slabs that paved the way from the monastery gates to the church door. They were busy and shouting on the belfry, too. What a restless night, I thought. How nice! One was tempted to see the same unrest and sleeplessness in all nature, from the night darkness to the iron slabs, the crosses on the tombs and the trees under which the people were moving to and fro. But nowhere was the excitement and restlessness so marked as in the church. An unceasing struggle was going on in the entrance between the inflowing stream and the outflowing stream. Some were going in, others going out and soon coming back again to stand still for a little and begin moving again. People were scurrying from place to place, lounging about as though they were looking for something. The stream flowed from the entrance all round the church, disturbing even the front rows, where persons of weight and dignity were standing. There could be no thought of concentrated prayer. There were no prayers at all, but a sort of continuous, childishly irresponsible joy, seeking a pretext to break out and vent itself in some movement, even in senseless jostling and shoving. The same unaccustomed movement is striking in the Easter service itself. The altar gates are flung wide open, thick clouds of incense float in the air near the candelabra. Wherever one looks, there are lights, the gleam and splutter of candles. There is no reading. Restless and light-hearted singing goes on to the end without ceasing. After each hymn, the clergy change their vestments and come out to burn the incense, which is repeated every 10 minutes. I had no sooner taken a place when a wave rushed from in front and forced me back. A tall, thick-set deacon walked before me with a long red candle. The grey-headed archimandrite in his golden mitre hurried after him with the censer. When they had vanished from sight, the crowd squeezed me back to my former position. But 10 minutes had not passed before a new wave burst on me, and again the deacon appeared. This time he was followed by the father sub-prior, the man who, as Hieronym had told me, was writing the history of the monastery. As I mingled with the crowd and caught the infection of the universal, joyful excitement, I felt unbearably sore on Hieronym's account. Why did they not send someone to relieve him? Why could not someone of less feeling and less susceptibility go on the ferry? "Lift up thine eyes, O Sion, and look around," they sang in the choir, "for thy children have come to thee as to a beacon of divine light from north and south, and from east and from the sea." I looked at the faces. They all had a lively expression of triumph, but not one was listening to what was being sung and taking it in, and not one was holding his breath. Why was not Hieronym released? I could fancy Hieronym standing meekly somewhere by the wall, bending forward and hungrily drinking in the beauty of the holy phrase. All this that glided by the ears of the people standing by me, he would have eagerly drunk in with his delicately sensitive soul, and would have been spellbound to ecstasy, to holding his breath, and there would not have been a man happier than he in all the church. Now he was plying to and fro over the dark river and grieving for his dead friend and brother. The wave surged back. A stout, smiling monk, playing with his rosary and looking round behind him, squeezed sideways by me, making way for a lady in a hat and velvet cloak. A monastery servant hurried after the lady, holding a chair over our heads. I came out of the church. I wanted to have a look at the dead Nicolay, the unknown canticle writer. I walked about the monastery wall, where there was a row of cells, peeped into several windows, and seeing nothing, came back again. I do not regret, now, that I did not see Nicolay. God knows, perhaps if I had seen him, I should have lost the picture my imagination paints for me now. I imagine the lovable poetical figure solitary and not understood, who went out at nights to call to Hieronym over the water, and filled his hymns with flowers, stars, and sunbeams, as a pale, timid man with soft, mild, melancholy features. His eyes must have shone not only with intelligence, but with kindly tenderness, and that hardly restrained, childlike enthusiasm which I could hear in Hieronym's voice when he quoted to me passages from the hymns. When we came out of church after Mass, it was no longer night. The morning was beginning. The stars had gone out, and the sky was a morose, greyish blue. The iron slabs, the tombstones, and the buds on the trees were covered with dew. There was a sharp freshness in the air. Outside the precincts, I did not find the same animated scene as I had beheld in the night. Horses and men looked exhausted, drowsy, scarcely moved, while nothing was left of the tar barrels but heaps of black ash. When anyone is exhausted and sleepy, he fancies that nature, too, is in the same condition. It seemed to me that the trees and the young grass were asleep. It seemed as though even the bells were not pealing so loudly and gaily as at night. The restlessness was over, and of the excitement nothing was left but a pleasant weariness, a longing for sleep and warmth. Now I could see both banks of the river. A faint mist hovered over it in shifting masses. There was a harsh, cold breath from the water. When I jumped onto the ferry, a chaise and some 24 men and women were standing on it already. The rope, wet and as I fancied drowsy, stretched far away across the broad river and in places disappeared in the white mist. "Christ is risen. Is there no one else?" asked a soft voice. I recognized the voice of Hieronym. There was no darkness now to hinder me from seeing the monk. He was a tall, narrow-shouldered man of 35, with large, rounded features, with half-closed, listless-looking eyes and an unkempt wedge-shaped beard. He had an extraordinarily sad and exhausted look. "They have not relieved you yet?" I asked in surprise. "Me?" he answered, turning to me his chilled and dewy face with a smile. "There is no one to take my place now till morning. They'll all be going to the Father Archimandrites to break the fast directly." With the help of a little peasant in a hat of reddish fur that looked like the little wooden tubs in which honey is sold, he threw his weight on the rope. They gasped simultaneously, and the ferry started. We floated across, disturbing on the way the lazily rising mist. Everyone was silent. Hieronym worked mechanically with one hand. He slowly passed his mild, lusterless eyes over us. Then his glance rested on the rosy face of a young merchant's wife with black eyebrows, who was standing on the ferry beside me, silently shrinking from the mist that wrapped her about. He did not take his eyes off her face all the way. There was little that was masculine in that prolonged gaze. It seemed to me that Hieronym was looking in the woman's face for the soft and tender features of his dead friend.